We're getting ready for the final panel. Dun, dun, dun. All right, let's officially start. Okay, so again, thank you everyone for coming back for our final panel, and I promise this is the last time I will share the housekeeping information. Once again, my name is Mindy Buchanan. I'm the Director of Patient Programs at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. We are pleased to host this event in partnership with our friends at Stronger Than Sarcoidosis. I'll be providing some quick information. So if you need to drop off and you want to join back, you can use the same link. And the event, the entire event, is indeed being recorded. And we will be sending those out to you later this week. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can, but these panels are not meant to be question and answer sessions. However, if you do have a question or comment, please do pop it into the question and answer section. You're not able to respond to the raised hand function. So if you do that and you see me put it down, it's because of that, and you will just need to add your question to the Q&A. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our third and final panel. First up is Mary McGowan. She is the CEO of Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Mary serves as the primary representative and spokesperson for FSR and leads the organization's strategic vision with patient engagement, strategic partnerships, fundraising, advocacy efforts, program direction, and an aggressive communications and research agenda. Mary brings over 35 years of nonprofit leadership and management to this role. Welcome, Mary. Frank is next, and he is the president of Stronger Than Sarcoidosis. He also serves as a longtime FSR patient advocate and patient navigator. Frank is and always has been a fighter. His strength and care for others is what personifies him and makes him Frank. Frank has also published 2 books about his experience with sarcoidosis. First one, I have sarcoidosis, but it does not have me. And the second, Walking in Silent Pain, was published in winter of 2020. Welcome, Frank. Next is Ann Wolf, and she is the manager of strategic advancement for Global Genes, where she leads the development of impactful and relevant programming to meet evolving needs of rare disease patients, families, advocates, and partners. Ann is a passionate patient advocate with over a decade of experience in creating events and programming for diverse stakeholder audiences in healthcare, life sciences, and beyond. Welcome, Ann. And last but not least, our fearless moderator for this session, Lily Stairs. Lily has served as an advocate for over a decade, transitioning into patient advocacy after she was diagnosed with multiple autoimmune diseases. Lily is the founder and principal at Patient Authentic, where she helps healthcare organizations build programs that educate and empower patients. She also serves as the vice chair of the board of directors for the American Autoimmune Related Disease Association. Welcome, Lily.
Thanks so much, Mindy. Excited to be here. Well, let's jump right in, shall we, as the final panel of the night. I know everyone's coming from different parts of the world. I'm over on the East Coast, so it's 7 p.m. for me. And excited to be here, excited to expand on the conversations that we heard earlier. And so let's jump right in and talk a little bit about what role does awareness and education play in improving patients' care, support, and access to clinical trials? And it looks like maybe Anne has something to say.
I'm certainly happy to start if no one else was jumping in, but didn't want to jump the line or anything. So first, I just want to thank all of my co-panelists here and the organizers for putting together such a wonderful event. And I think when it comes to clinical trial, awareness and education, I think it is so multifaceted because there are so many elements to that. And I think we've heard a lot earlier in the past 2 panels that have really spoken to me and echoed, I think, a lot of the sentiments that I hear in the larger rare disease community around what does it really take to build trust? Because I think that outreach, engagement, and awareness are so contingent on really building that trust. And trust is unfortunately a very nebulous thing that can be hard to build and secure. And I think longer term partnerships with community organizations that really understand the spaces in which they are working can be so helpful in this. And I think it's also really important for when we talk about education, outreach, and awareness to think about the larger medical community as well. It is so important, of course, to offer patient education, but also to ensure that we're educating and, supporting the growth of, the HCP community, industry stakeholders, and other researchers and experts, so that we're all moving forward together. Because there is nothing that I think any of us can do as individuals necessarily to move this giant needle on broader inclusivity and equity. But I think as a whole, when we all come together, there's an opportunity to really bridge that gap between awareness and participation and think about what true partnerships and engagement can mean. But certainly happy to speak to any of that in more detail. But I think I would just end on just saying that I think it's really important that when we're developing outreach and education materials, that we're listening to the communities and that we're not assuming that we know what might be most helpful or what tools or programs or outreach pieces or awareness would be of use and work. I think it's important that we take the time to listen and understand before we assume that we can launch something and have everyone say, oh, well, you built it and here we are. So I think it's a lot of listening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a term that comes to mind is co-creation, as you were talking, and this idea of us working together with all of these stakeholders to co-create those culturally competent materials, and really making sure that we are engaging a diverse set of stakeholders, and maybe not just the people who are raising their hand and easy to immediately find and collaborate with. So that's great insight. Thanks, Anne. Frank or Mary, do you want to add on to the conversation?
Go ahead, Mary.
Sure, I'll add on. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to all the panelists who are here and Lily for moderating. So I think it's really important that we obviously get the education out. I think it was so interesting to look at the poll of the community in the previous session that showed 57% of the attendees have not participated in clinical trials or research because they have not been asked or invited to, right? So we want to make sure that we are addressing that issue. We want to make sure that patients are comfortable going to their doctors and starting that conversation and asking about research. We want to make sure that we are empowering patients to do that and to make sure that, as we heard in the first patient panel about the importance of advocating for themselves, right? So this is a strong belief we have at FSR. We put all of the emphasis in empowering patients to make sure that they are comfortable, that they have the education that they need, that they know the right questions to ask. And this is a key component. And I'll just add one more thing, and then Frank would love to hear from you as well. But I would, I think it's really important for us, particularly in the African-American community, to educate about the importance of African-Americans, particularly African-American women, when we're looking at the prevalence of sarcoidosis, right? Highest prevalence, African-American women. So we need to be educating the real importance of African-Americans entering into research clinical trials, right? Because if we're looking for better therapies, if we're looking for eventually a cure, we want to ensure that we have a high record of participants in the research and in the clinical trials. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And I'll just say, and Frank, I want to pass it over to you. But on that clinical trials component, it's so essential that we're working again, co-creating collaboratively with particularly women of color when we are designing these trials, and making sure that the inclusion-exclusion criteria isn't going to exclude diverse populations from participating. And so I think that's just so essential that that's part of the process. Frank, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I have a different perspective because I am a patient as well as being an part of an organization. For me, it's two different things. One is with the education as well is knowing the process of a clinical trial. So many patients think, I want a drug, I want a cure now, but they don't know the whole process. So they don't know, like, they're so quick to blame pharmaceutical, or they're so quick to blame a researcher, where they don't know the process. When if they actually learned the whole process, I think it would make it a little bit easier for everybody to understand it, and more people, I think, would join in. And then the second thing I have to say is the government officials and offices, we really have to educate them, especially on not just sarcoidosis, but a lot of these distinctive, different diseases that, have multi, organ involvement. And so it's so hard for us to get into a trial because of that. And so I think, both of those aspects, I think, really need to be, worked on as organizations.
Yeah, such a great point, Frank. I love that you bring both the patient and organization perspective. So now, we've talked about what the role awareness and education plays. Let's talk a little bit about action. What is your organization doing now to achieve wider outreach and engagement? And how can patient and partners work with your organization to begin to address some of these challenges? Mary, I see you've come off mute.
Sure, I'd be happy to go first. So at FSR, we launched this year, later this fall, a Women of Color campaign, national campaign. And as part of this campaign, we put together a patient advisory council. Actually, we had tremendous interest in this. We had 75 applications to join this patient advisory council. But we also put together a clinical council of experts in this area. And so what we're doing is we're joining the two groups together. We're working together on this national campaign where we're going to be creating a lot of educational materials. We're going to be doing a Twitter chat, webinar. We're going to be working with the national media as well as doing some social media on this. But the point is to really educate, again, African-American women, educate clinicians about this. As Frank highlighted, the importance of ensuring that we're reaching out to FDA, NIH with this important information. It's a very exciting campaign. And in terms of how people can engage with us, please be on the lookout for the social media things that we'll be sending out, and please share them on your social media channels. Please join us on the campaign. There's a lot of exciting things that are going to be happening. We hope everybody on today's Zoom is hooked into our newsletter, where we'll be having a lot more information about this. But again, looking at the prevalence of sarcoidosis and looking at the opportunities here to launch a national campaign like this to really raise a lot more awareness and to take action on these really important issues.
Thanks, Mary. This is so exciting, and I'm excited to see that campaign evolve. It sounds like a great opportunity to get involved. And do you have anything at your organization or ways that folks can get involved? I know that you're coming at this from the holistic rare disease perspective.
Absolutely. No, and Lily, thank you, for bringing that up as well, because I think we had mentioned Global Genes in the introduction, and that was great for Mindy, but Global Genes is a larger rare disease organization that really does serve the rare disease community, including the sarcoidosis community, but also the broader space. And so I think when we're thinking about this, right, it does have a little bit of that kind of fusion between the grassroots perspective as well as that higher level kind of overarching community perspective. And I think what we have done, I think, a lot is really think about what is our role as a organization that works across the space in really helping to promote health equity. And so we have worked to establish this year a Health Equity Council, of which we are privileged to have Mary be a part of, which is wonderful. But I think also really working with them to understand and prioritize what are the biggest needs in the community and how can we strategically approach those? How can we help to educate our industry stakeholders? How can we help to empower the patient advocacy community? Right now, we do have a closed grant cycle, but we're hoping it will reopen again after we finish the pilot cycle that is focused on capacity building grants for organizations in the rare disease community that are looking to really take on projects of their own in equity, diversity, and inclusion, because we know that that can look so different across communities and can appear in different places, whether that's the diagnostic odyssey, whether that's an access to clinical trials. And so looking at that kind of broader space, but also really helping communities that are doing the work already to really drive more change. I think we would be a little silly if we assumed that we could fix everything as much as I might like to in my dreams, but certainly, I think we really want to help everyone to build capacity and to empower. And so I think also that the other piece that I would touch on, of which is certainly, I think, very accessible, to everyone, is that we do have a number of programs, live events, and webinars, both within the health equity kind of program, but also beyond that. And for Global Genes, what we've done, I think, as well, is say that this is EDI and, the equity conversation is not something that can be relegated to one part of our work or the other. I think it is really something that we have woven throughout our work. And so that's something that we try and take a lens to in each of our programs, whether we're writing an educational toolkit, reaching out to more diverse stakeholders, really trying to be more inclusive in the voices and perspectives that are represented, or whether that's in bringing in newer speakers or perspectives and experts who can really share new stories. So I don't want to go on forever, but happy to share more if anyone has questions after, certainly as well. So.
Yeah, and those are some great, I love everything that you're working on. And I think you've got some really concrete actionable takeaways that even other groups can think about too, right? So this idea of applying for grants in the DE&I space, I know that's certainly something that a lot of companies are ramping up their work in, which is great. And so a focus there. And then representation, bringing in, that's something that we're working on at the Autoimmune Association right now. We're planning a big summit this upcoming fall. We'll be announcing it in a few weeks. And we are working to ensure that we have diverse voices and we are tackling some of those issues, specifically for members of the minority community in the autoimmune community. And so that, again, that's just so essential in co-creating that with the group, as always. Frank, I saw you come off mute for a second and then I started blabbering away. So you've always got a million different things going on. So I'm sure you've got a lot to add here.
Well, a lot of the stuff that we are doing right now is behind the scenes. We joined some patient advocacy groups with pharmaceuticals to pair up and try to, bridge that gap. We've also done forums as well to talk about and get people to know about that as well. And one of the big things is, like I said before, is of course, I'm big on government officials. That's where I've started, and that's what I really talk about. So it's one of the things I really have been working on them, and we're actually working with NIH to just recognize us, because we are so distinct and so different but yet we have so many people that do have sarcoidosis, and it's like, how can we be forgotten? And so with NIH and knowing that, the rare disease is supposed to get a increase from the NIH, I've been working with them on that and trying to see where we could fit in with that, as well as FDA. And so we've been doing a lot of the back end of it, but trying to work it that way until, because for us, we are patients, and so a lot of the people will listen to us as a patient. So that's where our angles have always been.
Yeah, brilliant, and so important. It's where a lot of change happens, right, at the government and policy level. So it's exciting to see that you're working there. So, I've heard, Anne, I heard you say this in one of your first comments around meeting patients where they are. And so what can we collectively do to meet and reach patients where they are, meaning, economically, geographically, physically, and mentally, to improve the opportunity for them to participate in clinical trials. And I'm gonna go first here because I'm sort of wearing the moderator and panelist hat, or at least that's what I was told. So forgive me if I'm if I'm overstepping. But I do also come into this conversation wearing a few different hats. I worked and consult for a company in the clinical trial space, Clara Health, and that's where a lot of my advocacy roots are. And one thing, if there's one really core thing I've learned, it's the importance of advocacy organizations and patient advocates working collaboratively with some of these clinical research organizations who recruit for clinical trials, as well as the pharmaceutical sponsors. Unfortunately, despite this the amazing vaccines that the pharmaceutical companies have brought to us and some of these really innovative medicines, pharma remains one of the least trusted industries in the country and around the world. And so as patient advocacy organizations, we are in a position to really really reach patients that pharmaceutical companies and clinical research organizations may not be able to, because we have started to build that level of trust. And our ability to reach in and partner, again, this was a point that Anne made, to partner with some of those community-based organizations, like faith-based organizations, YMCAs, the local hairdresser, barbershop. If we can do that, we can then help these CROs and pharmaceutical companies recruit for clinical trials and recruit diverse participants for clinical trials. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration there. And I would love to see more of that personally. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on this question. Again, it's how can we do better to reach patients where they are?
Well, I'll jump in really quick. Like for us, we have support groups. We actually have online support group now, and it was funny, we started it before the pandemic, but because we started it for the reason of like what Brandy was saying. She lives in North Dakota. How many people actually have that she can get a group to speak about it? So that's one of the things that we started to do. And we started to actually talk about clinical trials, because a lot of people didn't even know about clinicaltrial.gov, or didn't know that FSR actually puts clinical trials on their page. And so we were discussing about that. Like, I looked up today, there are 31 active sarcoidosis clinical trials right now. And I bet you hardly any of the people that are watching would know that unless they actually go on the thing. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is because like they were saying, like the poll said, they were never asked. Well, if you could take the step forward and also find out about them. And that's what we're trying to do, is get them to step forward and get out of, we always say, get out of the uncomfortable or get into the uncomfortable, really. And because this whole discussion is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And, learning about the distrust, I hit it head on. I talk about two pharmaceuticals, I talk to patients, and I try to bring them together. And that's what we've been trying to do as an organization, to do that.
Yeah, that's outstanding. That getting comfortable with the uncomfortable and having the tough conversations and bringing all the different stakeholders to the table. Anne or Mary? Oh, Mary, go ahead.
I would add too, and it was brought up in the expert panel, of really looking at exploring more in-depthly technologies that can help, right, with the clinical trial process. And how can we, meet patients where they're at, if they're in rural communities, if they can't get away from their job to participate. These barriers that are keeping, right, patients from participating in these clinical trials. A lot of this could potentially be addressed through technologies. The other thing is, I would ask, corporate America, where are they on this? How can they engage with us in this? Corporate America will pay for employees to take time off to go to the doctors. Well, we should be paying employees who are living with chronic diseases like sarcoidosis to participate in clinical trials. So I think if we look at these larger entities that we can work with and collaborate with, as part of the solution to this, whether it's be these big technology companies or, as I said, just general corporate America and others. I think these are really important relationships, collaborations, and can help us all move the needle and need to be continued to be explored.
Mary, that's a really outstanding point that I personally not thought much about, and I've not heard it mentioned on any of these types of conversations thus far. And I do think that employers and corporate America, to your point, are a really critical stakeholder, and a lot of that work in education falls to us as advocacy groups to help call this to their attention. And so that could really be a whole another panel in and of itself, is how you approach that. And I saw you come off mute for a second. I want to give you an opportunity to chime in.
Absolutely. Well, I figured I would mute myself to be safe in case like lawnmower came by or something. I mean, I know we're all working from home, so noise happens. But I think great points made by both Frank and Mary. And I think what I would just add is that I think sometimes the barriers might not necessarily be what we expect them to be. And maybe those of us on this call might have broader expectations because we've been doing this work and we've been trying to understand more about these barriers. But I think sometimes the research community comes in and assumes that maybe, it's, well, you can't get parking validated or you can't have X, Y, or Z, but it may actually be, well, if I take this time off, I could lose my job, or I might not be available for my child's pickup. And I think taking the time for the research community to really think about what are those barriers and just to listen and understand, and then think about how we can mitigate those to make sure that these are accessible and that we're not placing an undue burden on patients who are already dealing with an immense amount of complexity in their day-to-day lives, on top of, the fact that the world is a complicated place. And so I think really trying to understand what those barriers are and then build solutions to them, and understanding that that's going to probably look different across geographical areas, across socioeconomic kind of divides, across ethnic divides, and being okay and taking the time to listen. And I think also really leaning into that idea of being okay with being uncomfortable, being okay stepping outside of your comfort zone and being open and a little bit vulnerable to really hearing what may have been some of these past issues of trust violation or of miscommunication or in gaps in care. I think that we heard a lot of stories in the patient panel earlier that really highlighted some of the moments when I think doctors may have ignored what that patient was living through in everyone's case. And I think that's a very common story in rare disease, unfortunately. And so I think taking the time to listen, taking the time to understand, also what types of clinical research would be most beneficial to the quality of life, even if it's maybe not a cure, but what is going to really make that, patients' lives better on a day-to-day basis, and how can we help to empower patients and provide them with the tools and support to engage in research so that we can really get better treatments to everyone at the end of the day.
Yeah, and great points. Oh, Mary, I'm sorry, I saw you jump off mute.
Oh, no, I was just going to add a little on to what Anne's great points, and also bring up the mental health component about, the day-to-day living. And, that was a conversation, right, for both previous panels. It's such an important part of this discussion and of moving the needle forward. And really going back to women for a moment, I mean, we know this, the science shows us, women are 50% more likely to be depressed even without a chronic disease, right? Just in general life, okay? And then when they're diagnosed with a chronic disease, I mean, they're much more likely to be fall to depression. These are really things that our clinicians really need to be looking at, having the conversations with to support. We know that this is not happening enough. This is, again, a big focus where we're trying to put a lot of emphasis on mental health, particularly during these times of COVID, where patients are feeling very isolated. And, living with a chronic disease is isolating already, but during these times, it's been exceedingly challenged. So how can we bring the communities together, and how can we build upon that, build upon the trust, and have them network with one another to talk about these important issues, including research. And I would encourage, by the way, anybody who's on this Zoom to please sign up, patients to sign up for FSR's registry. It's a great way to start to get involved in the research process. Perhaps one of my team members can put the link up in the chat so people know how to do that. That would be very helpful. But please take a moment when it's convenient for you and sign up. Thank you.
Yeah, all such important points. And, I'll just add that I think there's an opportunity for us as advocacy organizations, and for anyone else who's tuning in that's coming from an advocacy organization, to help be stewards of this message of inclusivity to pharmaceutical companies in the preclinical stages. And so, because they need to be, what we see happen far too often is pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies who, well-intentioned, they've started to recruit for their clinical trial, but the design, the protocol is just not going to be something that is patient-centric or patient-friendly, or it's just going to, it's not going to allow for diversity and inclusion. And so for us to be able to make those connections into patients within the community, patients like Frank, who are experts and can provide that insight to the companies and help guide them on what makes the most sense, so that we are able to keep driving this innovation forward. And Frank, I saw you come off mute too, so I want to let you jump in.
I wanted to say one thing is also the collaboration of all of us really means a lot, because like I said, being a patient, I know being heard and actually being listened to and showing that we all are listening to them and that we're all on the same page, and that really gives helps a patient, especially mentally. It really, because that's one of you, like you said, you always feel alone. So as a patient, and even though you may have somebody who's close, it's still you feel alone. So just having the collaboration, having everybody here together saying, yes, we do hear you, and yes, we do want to make this better, and we, instead of not just listening, we're actually making actions to get this better.
Love it. It sounds like we are all very much aligned. So I have another question I want to ask, and then possibly go over to some of the Q&A that we're seeing come in. What do all of you see as your organization's role in driving change on clinical practice to make it more inclusive?
I'm happy to start this time. I feel like we're kind of passing the ball back.
I like it. Very respectful panel.
Do our best. So, I think from our standpoint, we view ourselves very much as kind of an engine for empowerment and convening. And I think really as a group that seeks to serve a diverse set of needs across the 7,000 rare diseases, 7,000 to 8,000 rare diseases in this space, I think that might look a little bit different than it would for Mary or Frank. But for us, I think we really focus on trying to bring key stakeholders together, working with our policy partners, working with our research collaborators, and really thinking about how can we all come together, identify these barriers, and really bridge strategies to hopefully address them. I think one of the things that we specifically do with regards to clinical care is through our Rare Compassion program, which matches rare disease patients and families directly with medical students to help enrich their medical learning, and kind of think about what is it that you might not know that you're not going to find in a textbook. Because I think rare diseases are very much not so much a textbook in general. And so really thinking about what is that lived experience, right? And helping them to understand and be more patient-centric in this kind of cohort of future doctors. And I think also just understanding that this is really a multi-pronged approach and kind of multi-level, and that there has to be community level, grassroots empowerment, engagement, and capacity building, but also, you know, a higher level of engagement with stakeholders like the NIH, the FDA, legislators, to really help move from both ends, because I think it can't happen from either side, in my personal opinion. And I think it really takes all of us coming together through multifaceted approaches to bring together a kind of cohesive idea and solution, and to identify those shared barriers. And I think also, you know, when in every program that we develop, we try really hard to not ever do so in a bubble, and to really say, we don't want to just dictate what the community needs, but really take the time to listen, to have conversations, to do the outreach, even if maybe it takes a few times because organizations might have had trust broken in the past, and to just take the time and have the patience to be a good partner. And I think that is maybe, you know, I think Frank spoke to this as well, right? Sometimes just being able to hear someone in a really tangible sense, and not just say that, you know, oh, of course, but really sitting and hearing and appreciating that, I think can be a very powerful tool in building trust across communities and divides.
Yeah, spot on, Anne. Thank you so much for that insight. Frank or Mary, do you want to add?
Well, for us, like, you know, because we're patients, our organization said we're patients for patients. So we work on the patient level a lot more. And that's where we get the listening. And then a lot of the stuff, like when we hear it, we go with others, like I said, the collaboration, like with FSR and then Burning Mac, and just getting us all together and trying to figure out a solution of how we're going to get this, you know, because like I said, we're working with the patients a lot on that level. So we do get, and it's just some things, you know, we hear that we would love to do, but we just can't do it. But if we could work together, we definitely can get things done. So we're kind of like, you know, on that patient level. So
yeah. Well, and there's always the opportunity for you to jump in with some of the organizations, like, you know, Global Genes, and yes, to have conversations. Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, and you know, driving change on clinical practice is obviously very important, and something we've been focusing on quite a bit lately. Again, with the Women of Color campaign, going back to that and including a clinical committee, but you know, which is really important to have that conversation, you know, at that level with the patients, to talk about these barriers and to talk about these issues. The other thing is we're doing this fall a clinical conference, bringing together leaders from sarcoidosis clinics and WASOG centers of excellence around the world together. And as part of that conference, we're including ancillary staff who are going to be talking about, again, barriers that they hear, and suggestions and brainstorming, as well as best practices, right, that we're all going to come collectively together over a 2-day period. So it's very exciting, but this is a really important issue, Lily, and thank you for raising that question.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly is. And, you know, we're working on that at the Autoimmune Association too. I'll say that, you know, when we look at, for autoimmune diseases, 78% of the people living with autoimmune diseases are women. And we see that there is a very severe, there's a huge mistrust happening for women, and especially women of color, in our patient population. And you could look at a patient like me, a 3-time autoimmune patient. I went in and out of the ER 3 times in one weekend. The doctors kept sending me home because they didn't believe that I was actually in pain. They thought I was faking it, that I was seeking drugs, that, you know, I was unhappy at home or school or what have you. And I'll tell you, I talked to a lot of autoimmune patients, and day in and day out, and almost everybody has a story that's very similar to mine. By the way, 2 weeks into the hospital stay, they found bleeding ulcers in my small intestine. So I certainly wasn't faking it. But this is something that we hear over and over again. And I'm not a woman of color, right? Like I'm a woman, and that certainly was working against me, but I can't even begin to imagine what it is like for a woman of color. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in our system when it comes to driving clinical practice changes and making them more inclusive. And one thing that we are doing at the Autoimmune Association is we just received a grant from Corey to develop out a toolkit in partnership with patients and physicians on the disparities between time to diagnosis and care and treatment for women of color versus your white people who are diagnosed with autoimmune conditions. So, there's certainly more work to be done there. And I think that as advocacy organizations, we can go ahead and seek those grants and really carve out projects and make DE&I a priority. Anne?
You're very observant on your unmutes. I love it.
I try.
So, I just wanted to add as well that one of the things that we developed, which I'm happy to share with the organizers after the panel, as well as toolkits that are right now, we're currently focusing on a series of toolkits that's really focused on what are clinical trials, what does it mean to participate in a clinical trial, and really providing more toolkits aimed at shared decision-making between caregivers, patients, families, and clinicians, so that everyone has the tools to really understand, because I think, especially in advanced research, a lot of times informed consent is not always clear, or, but we had a wonderful group of experts before who I think clearly spoke to the value of explaining the details of this, explaining the risk, and being transparent. And so, I think that may not be every situation. And so also giving patients and families really the tools to support themselves in those conversations so that they aren't so daunting, and so that people really can feel like they walked away with some shared understanding and not just more questions and fear about the unknown.
I love that. And I got to say, I'm a big fan of the Global Genes toolkits. You have developed some fabulous toolkits. I've been using them over the years. So I highly recommend checking those out. And I did want to flag that it looks like someone did post the FSR patient registry in the chat. And so definitely be sure to check that out too, so you can stay in the loop on trials. All right, so as we're coming in on the last 10 minutes here of the panel, I want us to move into a bit of a lightning round and go around and just have one more question around what do organizations like yours need from patients, clinicians, other organizations, federal agencies, legislators, and regulators to begin to move the needle around diversity and inclusion for those living with rare and chronic conditions? It's a big question.
I'll go first.
All right, Frank, I love it for you.
First off, on the patient end, I've always said this. They always say there's a face of this disease or a face of that disease. Well, there should be 200,000 faces of sarcoidosis. Every patient should be, even if just do a little thing of, and it may seem little, is calling your legislator and talking to them about your story. It means a lot. Just those little steps of just talking to somebody on the street. You're walking on the street, just bringing awareness. And then, like, they call me the man in purple because I'm always wearing, wherever I go, I wear purple. But people ask me, like, I wear my sarcoidosis shirts. What is it? What is it? And it helps brings awareness, and the right people actually start to talk to you, and you start. I think you bring up conversation, which is always good for rare diseases. So on that the patient aspect.
Anne?
I'll jump in, give Mary the closing. But I think my call to action, I guess, would be that I think it's a big question, right? But I think that there is a need to come together and come to a shared understanding. I think also, while I've said this before, I think we all need to take the time not only to educate ourselves, but to educate our communities, and to not assume that we know what the answer or the outcome would be or what is most needed, but rather to take the time to listen, to co-create, and to really collaborate. And I think the other thing that I would say that is maybe coming out of one of the earlier panels more than this one was just that patients, I think, have every right to ask for and advocate for care. to ask for additional resources, to push their providers and their care team to really ensure that they are getting access to the things that they need, whether that is auxiliary services, whether that's mental health care, whether that is a specific medication or path of treatment. And I think that, you know, we are all kind of ingrained with this idea that the doctors know what's best. But many times in rare diseases, especially like sarcoidosis, where there are so many diverse and different and kind of unique effects, that doctors may not have all the answers. And it's really important for us to advocate as advocates and as patients and caregivers for ourselves in clinical care settings, as well as in the broader research ecosystem, and to know that it's okay and that we have the agency and the right to do that. And I think, you know, it's not always easy or comfortable, nor should the burden always have to be on patients. But I think that it's important for patients to know that they have that right to divorce their doctor, as was said earlier, or, you know, just look for other options and really pursue what they feel is going to be most helpful to them.
It's powerful. Mary?
Great. So I would end with the 3 C's, and this is not to simplify because it is a very complex question. But I think collaboration with all of the entities that you highlighted in the question, Lily, collaboration is very big and must be at the forefront. And in order to collaborate, communication, we've heard that in the other panels. I'm going to emphasize that here. I think the communication is critically important as part of that collaboration, so that everybody is talking about this, that people feel comfortable talking about this, that we are moving the needle, and that we are effectively communicating, and so that we're all on the same understanding. And the third point is really the most important, and that is caring, right? This is about patients living with sarcoidosis, right? Patients are at the center of this, and caring is critically important for each and every individual patient, to be able to meet them where they are, to support them where they are, to empower them where they are. And what can we do to help them on every level, whatever that means, and to be able to take the time to care. And that can be someone making a phone call to someone, right? It's connecting to another patient. It's the doctors listening, right? We've heard all these different scenarios, right, that are really important. So again, I think collaboration, communication, and caring, if we can focus on those things, I think we'll ultimately get to the point where, again, that what is the phrase? The high tide rises all boats. So thank you.
Yeah, Mary, I love that. And I think that's a great way to end. And I want to take a moment to connect a few of the different things that you said, and share that I think there's such a value in us caring and communicating, and Frank, and your point, tying the patient story in, because one of my favorite lines as a marketer at heart is that facts tell, stories sell. And our ability to keep being collectors of stories and to share is really what's going to help us move the needle, because we can bring those stories to legislators, we can bring those stories to clinicians, we can bring those stories to fellow patients, and people remember that, right? We're inherently storytelling beings, and people remember stories, so not facts. So very excited. This was an amazing discussion, amazing series of conversations to pack into a Tuesday evening. So thank you so much to FSR for bringing us all together. And Mindy, I will pass it back over to you to take us home.
Thank you, Lily. And thank you to everyone on this panel and such a lively and just important conversation. I'm actually going to hand it off to Mary McGowan, who's officially going to close us out. We had Frank open us up, and now we have Mary closing us out. So I will hand it over to her. And after that, we will say goodnight. There you go.
There we go. Great. Thank you, Mindy. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this evening's enlightening discussion on diversity, inclusion, and sarcoidosis. On behalf of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research and Stronger Than Sarcoidosis, I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to our extraordinary patient speakers for sharing their powerful stories, our incredible expert panel for providing meaningful insights on how to address barriers to care and support, and to my fellow representatives from the patient advocacy organizations for framing what steps we can take and what we need to be more successful in moving this needle forward. FSR and Stronger Than Sarcoidosis will be creating together a summary statement from this event, which we will share with our clinical, regulatory, and advocacy partners. This discussion does not end here by any means. However, the summit is a crucial first step toward improving care for all impacted by this complex rare disease. Thank you to all who participated, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to improve the care, support, and clinical trial access of those living with sarcoidosis and other complex rare diseases. Thank you so very much.